Sometimes all it takes is the smell of baked apples and cinnamon to knock the wind right out of me. Just this morning, I pulled a pie out of the oven, my hands moving like they always have, crust just golden, sugar melting on top, and suddenly, there it was. That chill down my spine, that knot in my throat, that memory I try not to touch. Funny, isn't it? A simple apple pie and boom, I'm back in 1961. Back in that little kitchen with the yellow curtains I sewed myself. Back when I still believed love could fix everything, and my little girl still trusted the world. Now, I don't usually talk about this. Lord knows I've spent years tucking it away like an old photograph you don't want anyone to find. But lately, I don't know, I've been feeling like maybe it's time. Maybe someone out there needs to hear this. Maybe some mama's sitting in her chair right now, heart heavy with questions she's too scared to ask. And maybe, just maybe, my story might help her open her eyes before it's too late. I was 22 the first time I laid eyes on Tom. He had quiet eyes, the kind that make you think you're safe. And in those days, that's all a girl like me was looking for, was safety. Someone who come home every night, keep the car running, say, "Yes, ma'am," to my daddy. He was polite, well-spoken, and he never raised his voice. I thought, well, shoot, this one's a keeper. We got married in the fall, leaves were just starting to turn, and my mama cried the whole service. Not because she was worried, just 'cause she said, "You're my baby girl and now you're someone else's." Back then, I thought life would be just like that wedding day, simple, sweet, full of Sunday afternoons and warm casseroles. But you know how it goes. Life has a way of twisting on you when you least expect it, and sometimes the people you think you know, well, turns out you didn't know 'em at all. Now I ain't gonna get ahead of myself. This isn't a story I can tell all in one breath. No, ma'am. It's too layered for that. Too raw. But I'll tell you this much, I should have known sooner. I did know deep down that mother's knowing, the kind that wakes you up at 2 a.m. for no reason. That whisper in your gut when your child flinches and says she fell down the stairs, again. But I was scared. Scared of what it meant. Scared of what it would do to our family. Scared of what folks would say. And so I did what too many women do. I pushed it down. Smiled through it, set the table, laughed at church, told myself, maybe she's just sensitive. Maybe I'm overthinking. Land sakes alive, if I had $1 for every maybe, I whispered into my pillow. But the truth, it always comes out. Sometimes it leaks slow, like water through a crack in the ceiling. Sometimes it bursts through like a freight train. For me, it was a neighbor lady. Sweet old Martha. She came by one afternoon with a jar of peach preserves and a look in her eye that made my knees weak. She said, "Honey, you really don't see it, do you?" And that was the end of sleep for a long, long time. So here I am now, all these years later, sitting with this old memory hanging heavy on my shoulders, like a wool coat in August. And I keep a skin myself. What if I had listened sooner? What if I had trusted my gut? But you can't change the past. You can only reckon with it. And that's what I'm fixin' to do here, piece by piece, memory by memory. Maybe if I lay it all out, someone out there'll hear it and recognize the signs. Maybe someone will make a different choice than I did. You stick with me now, all right? This ain't an easy story, but it's a true one. And truth, well, sometimes it's the only thing that can set a soul free. Now let me ask you something. Have you ever seen something that didn't sit right in your gut and looked the other way? Be honest. Write it down below. Somebody out there's reading. Maybe even someone who needs it more than you know. I grew up in a little town that didn't even have a stoplight till I was near 20. We had one gas station, 2 churches, and a diner with the best fried okra this side of the Mississippi. Folks knew each other's dogs by name. You could leave your front door unlocked and nobody thought twice. That was just the way things were back then. Slow, simple, and stitched together with Sunday suppers and borrowed cups of sugar. I was just a girl with skinned knees, sunburnt shoulders, and big ideas about what my life would be. I used to lie on the back porch swing, watching the fireflies and thinking the whole world was good, or at least good enough. My mama, bless her soul, was the quiet kind, always humming while she cooked, and my daddy smelled of pipe tobacco and motor oil. He wasn't a talker, but he'd squeeze your shoulder when he passed you by, and somehow that meant more than words. We didn't have much. Lord knows we didn't have a pot to pee in half the time, but we made do with what we had. Hand-me-down dresses, biscuits from scratch, and dreams that stretched just far enough to keep you going. I wasn't the prettiest girl in town, not by a long shot. My hair had a mind of its own, and I was always getting in trouble for speaking before I thought. But I had a heart big as a wash tub and a head full of books, and back then, that felt like enough. I believed, truly believed, that love could fix anything. That being kind would always be returned. That if you were good, the world would be good back to you. Funny how life tests those beliefs. I remember my first job was working the counter at Mrs. Talley's shop, mostly sewing supplies, buttons, ribbons, and notions. I loved it. The smell of fabric, the slow ticking of the ceiling fan, the way older ladies came in with stories more than shopping lists. That's where I first saw him, Tom. Quiet, respectful, a little shy. He'd come in to buy thread for his mama, and I remember thinking how rare that was, a man helping his mother sew. He had these calm eyes that made you feel like he was listening even when you weren't talking. I fell fast, I won't lie. Back in those days, girls like me were taught to look for a man who'd bring home a paycheck and keep his voice down. I thought I'd hit the jackpot. When he asked to walk me home one day, I near dropped the jar of buttons in my hand. We didn't date long, folks didn't in those days. 2 months later, he asked Daddy for permission, and Mama sewed my wedding dress out of cream cotton with blue ribbon at the waist. I still have it, you know, packed in tissue paper in a box I never open. Some things are too heavy for daylight. I thought life started the day I became a wife. That now I was someone real. I set our little house up with lace curtains and a pie tin on the windowsill. I cooked every meal from scratch and wrote his name in hearts on the grocery list. I was proud to be Mrs. Tom Garland. Thought it meant something. Thought I was safe. Looking back now, I see how small my world was. How tight it had been stitched. I didn't know what I didn't know. I had never seen cruelty wrapped in quiet. I didn't understand how love can be used like a rope, soft at first, then slowly pulled until you can't breathe. But back then I still believed. I believed people told the truth. I believed a husband was always a protector. I believed if I gave enough of myself, he'd always be gentle. And I believed, most of all, that home was the safest place in the world. That's the thing about memory, darling. It doesn't always warn you before it turns the page. Her name was Martha Lillian Jameson, and she lived 2 houses down from us in a white clapboard home with blue shutters that never quite shut right. She was what we used to call a woman with a backbone, you know the type. Wore her gray hair in a twist, drove a beat-up Buick like she was on a mission, and had a tongue sharper than any knife in my kitchen drawer. Folks said she used to be a nurse back in the war, but she never talked much about it. Just carried herself like someone who'd seen things most people couldn't imagine, and didn't flinch at hard truths. I didn't know her well, not at first. We'd wave when we passed each other, maybe exchange pie recipes over the fence. She'd hand me a bag of tomatoes from her garden now and again, and I'd send her a jar of pickled beets in return. That's just how it was in our neighborhood, quiet kindnesses, unspoken understandings. But Martha, she saw things. She noticed. It started with a knock on the door one Tuesday afternoon. I was in the kitchen, trying to get the crust just right on a lemon meringue, when I heard it. I opened the door, still in my apron, flour on my cheek, and there she stood, Martha, holding a jar of peach preserves in one hand and something in her eyes I couldn't quite name. "I thought you might like some of these," she said, real casual, but her voice was tight, like a thread pulled too far. I thanked her, of course, but she didn't move to leave. Just looked past me into the house, real quiet-like. Then she said something I'll never forget. "Honey, I was just wondering, everything all right with your little girl?" Now, let me tell you, my heart near dropped right through my shoes. My first thought was to smile, to laugh it off, to say something like, "Oh, you know kids, always fallin', always fussin'." But her eyes stopped me. They were too still, too knowing. "She's a sweet thing," Martha said, "but she's jumpy." Flinched when I said her name yesterday. Looked like she'd seen a ghost. And that was when something inside me shifted. I can't quite explain it. It was like a cold wind blowing through a room you thought was sealed. I wanted to say no, to shut the door, to put that jar on a shelf and forget the whole thing. But instead, my hands just trembled, and all I could do was nod and say, "She's been quiet lately." That's all. Martha didn't push. She just patted my arm, real gentle, and said, "Well, if you ever want to talk, I'm here. You don't have to be alone in this world, you know." And then she left, just like that. I stood there in the doorway for what felt like a year, holding that jar and trying not to shake. I couldn't tell you why her words hit so hard. I didn't have proof. I didn't know anything. But Lord have mercy, my heart was pounding like a freight train. Because deep down, under all the smiles and Sunday dresses and bedtime prayers, there was a voice I'd been silencing for years, whispering, "Look closer. You know something's not right." That was the moment. I didn't know it then, but it was. The shift. The slow unraveling of everything I thought I knew. A simple visit, a few quiet words, and suddenly, the ground beneath me didn't feel so steady anymore. And I'll tell you what, sometimes it ain't the loud moments that change your life. Sometimes it's the soft ones. The knock at the door, the jar in your hand, the neighbor who dares to ask the question you've been too scared to say out loud. I didn't sleep that night. Not a wink. Just lay there in the dark, listening to the sound of my own breath and wondering how long I'd been looking the other way. It was around that same time the nights started feeling longer. I'd lie in bed, staring up at the ceiling fan, listening to it creak as it turned slow, like it knew something I didn't. Tom would be fast asleep beside me, breathing heavy, one arm stretched across the mattress like he owned every inch of it. And I'd just lie there, quiet, still, wondering when exactly my life had gotten so small. At first, I told myself it was just the usual stress. Money was tight, always had been. Tom had picked up extra hours down at the mill, and I'd taken to mending clothes for the neighbors to help make ends meet. It wasn't much, but we made do. We always did. That's how we did it in those days. You didn't complain. You didn't ask questions. You just kept on. But there were signs. Little things. My daughter, Ellie, she started coming home from school quieter than usual. Wouldn't eat her supper. Would flinch if Tom raised his voice, even just a bit. And then one night I went to put her laundry away and found her curled up in the closet, holding her knees, eyes wide like a trapped animal. I asked her what she was doing, and she said, "I just wanted to be where it's quiet." Lord have mercy, that should have been enough. It should have broken me wide open right then and there. But I froze. I told her everything was fine. I told her to come out and help me fold the towels. And when she looked at me with those big, frightened eyes, I smiled like a fool and pretended I didn't feel like screaming inside. What was I so afraid of? I ask myself that even now. Maybe I was afraid of what I already knew deep down. Afraid of losing the life I'd built, even if it was built on sand. Afraid of what folks would say at church. Afraid my parents would be ashamed of me for not choosing better. You see, back then, a woman was expected to endure. To hold the house together no matter what. You didn't air your dirty laundry, and you sure as sugar didn't accuse your husband of doing wrong without proof. And Tom, well, he was clever. Never raised a hand to me. Never shouted. Just had a way of staring long and cold, like he was measuring you from the inside out. He'd close doors quietly but firmly. He'd tell Ellie to mind her manners in that low voice of his. He'd remind me real calm-like that I should be grateful for what we had, that other women had it worse, that he was a good man. And Lord help me, I wanted to believe him. But I started watching more closely, started noticing how Ellie would tense up when he walked into the room, how she stopped wanting to sit on his lap, how her drawings turned from flowers and trees to dark scribbles and empty houses. I wanted to scream. I wanted to ask her. But every time I opened my mouth, fear clamped down hard. What if I was wrong? What if I tore my family apart over a hunch? That's the thing they don't tell you about Martha, and it ain't just about cooking and cleaning. It's about carrying guilt in your bones. It's about hearing a cry from the other room and a skin yourself 100 times whether you really heard it. And when you do nothing, it stays with you. It clings. I remember one Sunday, I tried to talk to the pastor's wife about it, real gentle-like, nothing too direct. She just smiled and said, "Well, you know how little girls can be, always looking for attention." I nodded, but inside I was screaming, "Why won't anyone see it?" So I did what so many women do when they feel the world closing in. I got quieter. I smiled bigger. I told myself, maybe it's just me. Maybe I'm tired. Maybe I'm wrong. But I wasn't. And I knew it, even if I couldn't say it out loud just yet. I remember the clock had just struck 5:12. I know, 'cause I was looking straight at it when the world stopped. Funny, the things your mind chooses to keep. I can't remember what I wore that day, or if the sun was out, but I remember that clock. Big oak thing with the brass hands, ticking away like it didn't know the house was about to break in half. Ellie was upstairs. Tom was out back, fiddling with the shed door. I was shelling peas at the sink when I saw Martha coming down the sidewalk. And I knew, before she even knocked, that something was coming. That kind of knowing that lives in your bones. She didn't bring jam this time. Didn't smile. She just stood there, real firm, and said in a voice I'll never forget, "I need you to come with me. Right now." I didn't ask questions. Just wiped my hands on my apron and followed. We walked 2 houses down, across her porch, through the screen door, into her kitchen where Ellie was sitting, knees pulled to her chest, crying so hard she was shaken. And when she looked up at me, oh God, that look. Not anger, not even fear. Disbelief. Like she wasn't sure I was real. Like she'd stopped expecting me to come. I dropped to my knees right there on Martha's floor and held her. And she clung to me like she was drowning, whispering things I will not repeat. Words that no child should ever know. And every one of them felt like a knife to the gut. My own baby. My own blood. I'd been right there, and I hadn't seen. Or worse, I had, and didn't want to. Tom had done things. Things that make your stomach turn. Things that don't belong in homes or hearts or this world at all. And she'd carried it alone for years, maybe. Smiling at breakfast. Tucking in her dolls. Living in fear of the man who was supposed to protect her. And me, what kind of mother was I? What kind of woman stands still while her child suffers? I remember screaming. Not out loud, not with my mouth, but inside, like my soul was split in open. I wanted to run to the river and throw myself in. I wanted to grab a hammer and find him. I wanted to tear down the whole damn house, beam by beam, but all I could do was hold her. Over and over I said, "I'm so sorry, baby. I didn't know. I didn't know." But the truth is, I did. In my heart, in the quiet, in the way she'd flinch, in the bruises, in the dreams that woke her at night. I knew, and I turned away. Martha called the police. I don't even remember the phone call, just the sirens later, the questions, the notebooks, the look in the officers' eyes when I told them what Ellie had said. Tom was gone by the time they got there. Slipped out through the back, like the coward he was. Vanished like smoke. 3 years it took before they found him in Kentucky. But that day everything ended. Or maybe started. I lost my husband, my home, my name. I lost the version of myself that believed silence was love. That day I buried her, the girl who smiled through storms and said grace over poison. And Ellie, she never called me mama again. Not for a long time. You want to know what shame feels like? It ain't loud. It's quiet. It sits on your chest at night and asks, why didn't you protect her? I still don't have a good answer. After the police left, after Ellie fell asleep on Martha's couch and the sun went down like it didn't care what had happened in our house, there was silence. Not the peaceful kind, not the kind that comes with bedtime prayers or Sunday naps. No, this was a heavy silence. A hollow kind, like the whole world had taken a breath and then forgot how to let it out. I went home that night, if you could still call it a home. I walked through the rooms like a stranger. Every picture on the wall, every chair, every curtain, it all looked the same. But it wasn't. I wasn't. The woman who'd hung those curtains was gone. The girl who once thought a good roast and a kind smile could fix anything, she'd vanished too. What was left was just me, raw, empty, and colder than I'd ever been. I slept on the couch for weeks. Couldn't go into the bedroom. Couldn't even look at the bed without feeling sick. I didn't eat much. I'd boil water for tea and then forget it on the stove. I'd stand by the window and stare into the backyard for hours, hoping maybe I'd wake up and find out it was all a dream. But it wasn't. It never was. And Ellie, she stayed with Martha for a while. Said she didn't want to come back home. Said she didn't feel safe. And how could I argue? I was the one who let the monster live under our roof. I was the one who smiled while my daughter silently screamed. The house got quiet. Too quiet. No more cartoons in the morning. No more laughter down the hall. Just the ticking of that big oak clock and my own breath echoing through the emptiness. I used to love being a mother. It gave me purpose. It gave me a name. But now I wasn't sure I deserved that title. I wasn't sure I deserved much of anything. I stopped going to church. Couldn't stand the hymns. Couldn't sit there next to women who still believed in happy endings. I didn't know what I believed anymore. Not in God, not in marriage, not in myself. My faith, well, it didn't die. It just went quiet. Like everything else. Folks whispered, of course. Small towns have a way of shrinking around you when you're carrying shame. Some said I should have known. Others said I must have known. Some pitied me. Some blamed me. And the truth is, I agreed with all of them, everyone. Some days, I'd sit on the porch with a cup of cold coffee and just try to feel something, anything. But most days, I felt like a ghost of a woman who used to live in my skin. I didn't clean out Tom's things right away. Couldn't bring myself to touch his shirts, his boots by the door. It wasn't grief. It wasn't love. It was something else, like fear mixed with guilt. Like if I moved anything, the truth would spill out all over the floor again, and I didn't have the strength to mop it up twice. There's a kind of loneliness that comes after the storm, when the world expects you to keep going, but your legs still remember the shaking. when everyone else is moving on, and you're still sitting in the wreckage, counting pieces that'll never fit the same again. And that's where I was. Alone. Not just in the house, but inside myself. No voice. No anchor. Just silence, the kind that hums in your bones and makes you wonder if you'll ever find your way out again. It didn't happen all at once. You don't wake up one day after all that mess and suddenly feel whole again. No, ma'am. It's slower than that. Softer, like spring creeping back in after a long, cruel winter. One bud at a time, one bird song in the early morning when you weren't expecting it. That's how it started for me. It was maybe 6 months after everything, after Tom disappeared, after Ellie stopped speaking to me, after the world turned gray. I was sitting on the church steps. I still couldn't bring myself to go inside, but some mornings I'd walk down there anyway, just to sit, just to listen to the creak of the wood as folks filed in. That sound used to bring me comfort. Now, it just reminded me of all the things I lost. That day, a little girl came up to me. Couldn't have been more than 6 or 7. Freckles, pigtails, one sock fallen down. She had a Band-Aid on her elbow and a half-eaten lollipop in her hand. She looked at me with those big eyes, not afraid, not curious, just there. Present. She said, "You look sad. Do you want a lick?" Lord have mercy. I laughed. For the first time in months, I really laughed. The kind that bubbles up and surprises you. I thanked her, of course, and told her to keep it for herself. But she sat beside me anyway, swinging her legs like it was the most normal thing in the world. Her mama came running a minute later, apologizing, but I told her it was all right. More than all right. After they left, I sat there a while longer, feeling different. Just a bit. Like maybe the world hadn't closed itself off completely. Like maybe, just maybe, there was still a little light leaking through the cracks. That afternoon, I went home and pulled out an old box from under the bed. Inside were things I hadn't touched in years, fabric scraps, thread, buttons and jars. I used to sew for folks around town, remember? Before life got too heavy. My hands were stiff, but muscle memory is a funny thing. I sat down at the kitchen table, dusted off the machine, and started patching up an old apron that had been lying in the laundry for God knows how long. Next day, I took it to the women's shelter 2 towns over. Just walked in, set it on the counter, and asked if they needed any mending done. The lady at the front desk looked surprised, like I'd offered something strange, but she smiled. Said they always had clothes in need of fixin'. Told me to come back whenever I liked. So I did. Every Tuesday, I'd bring my sewing kit and sit with the women there. Most were quiet. Some wouldn't look me in the eye, but I knew that silence. I'd lived in it, and somehow threading a needle for someone else felt like prayer. Like saying I see you without ever speaking the words. Bit by bit, they started talking to me. And bit by bit, I started listening. And wouldn't you know, the more I helped, the lighter my own heart began to feel. I ain't saying it fixed me. I don't think people get fixed like broken dishes. But it gave me a reason to wake up. A place to be. A way to serve that didn't require explaining who I was or what I'd lost. Just hands and thread and presence. That little girl on the church steps, she never knew what she gave me. But she reminded me that sometimes, even in the middle of sorrow, there's kindness. There's softness. And maybe that's where healing starts. Not with big declarations or perfect endings, but with a child offering you a lollipop on a cold Sunday morning. It happened on a Tuesday. Funny how ordinary days hold the biggest moments sometimes. I was sorting through boxes in the attic, old linens, photo albums, scraps of a life that once felt whole. The air was thick with dust and memory. I wasn't looking for anything in particular, just trying to clear some space, inside and out. That's when I found it. An old flannel shirt of Tom's, still folded, still faintly carrying the scent of motor oil and cologne he used to wear. I froze. My hands started shaking like they did that night in Martha's kitchen. That shirt, it wasn't just cloth. It was the last thing I'd never touched. The last thing I'd never burned. I sat there on the attic floor, holding it like a question. And after a long while, I said out loud no more. Not with anger. Not with hate. Just truth. Quiet and firm. I walked it outside, took it straight to the fire pit, and I stood there while the flames took it back. Not quickly, not like in the movies. It burned slow, like everything else. And as I watched that fabric curl and fall into ash, I felt something inside me loosen. Not disappear, no, the pain never does, but shift. Like it wasn't mine to carry anymore in the same way. Like I had a right to finally say, I'm done. That was the moment I truly understood something I'd fought for years. I don't have to keep paying for what I didn't do, but I do have to take responsibility for what I let be. And I have. And I am. Every day. I wrote Ellie a letter that night. Handwritten, shaky pen, tear-stained paper. I didn't ask her to forgive me. I just told her the truth. Every part one could find words for. I told her how sorry I was for being blind, for being afraid, for leaving her alone in her own home. I told her I'd carry that sorrow till my last breath, not as punishment, but as reminder. That love isn't silence. That fear's no excuse. That a mother's job ain't just feeding and clothing, it's seeing. I ended it with, I don't expect you to write back, but I want you to know I'm still here, and I always will be, no matter how far, no matter how long. 2 weeks later, I got a postcard in the mail, just a picture of a sunflower field. No words, but I knew it was from her. That was her way, quiet, cautious. But it was something, a seed, and that was all I needed. That summer, I packed up that house. Too many ghosts, too many rooms full of echoes. I moved to a small apartment on the edge of town. 1 bedroom, 1 window with a view of the trees. And peace. That was new. Now I tend a little garden. I mend clothes for women at the shelter. I call Ellie every year on her birthday. Sometimes she answers. Sometimes she doesn't. But that's all right. I don't call to be heard. I call to show I'm still reaching. I used to think survival meant holding on, but I know now it's about letting go. So that's what I chose. I let go of the shame, of the should'ves, of the woman I was when I didn't listen to my own daughter crying through silence. I chose to live the rest of my days not as a prisoner of the past, but as a witness to it. Not perfect, not heroic, just honest. You know, if you'd asked me back then what I thought life was all about, I'd probably have said family, faith, and keeping things together. And I don't think I was wrong, just incomplete. I used to think being strong meant smiling through the hurt, holding your tongue, keeping the peace no matter what it cost. I thought silence was love. That sacrifice was the price of being a good woman, a good wife, a good mother. But now, after all these years, after all that silence and ache and rebuilding, I know better. Strength, real strength, ain't about enduring the wrong things. It's about numbing them. It's about looking truth in the eye and saying, no, not here, not anymore. I wish someone had told me that sooner. That love without safety isn't love at all. That if your gut is screaming, and your child is shrinking, and your heart's breaking quietly in the kitchen, you're not crazy. You're awake. There's this thing women of my generation were taught, to be quiet, to smooth things over, to not make a scene. And Lord knows, I was good at that. I played my part. I kept the house neat. I baked the pies. I smiled at church and tucked my daughter in every night, even when her eyes begged me to ask her what was wrong. And I didn't. Not soon enough. But here's what I've learned. We can't change what we didn't know. But we can change what we do with what we know now. And that's the real story. You don't get to rewrite the past. But you sure as heaven get to choose how you live the rest of your days. With your eyes open. With your hands steady. With your voice, even if it trembles. I used to ask myself every night, why didn't I stop it? And for years, I let that question eat me alive. But I've come to see, maybe the better question is, what will I stop now? What voices will I listen to? What wounds will I believe? We all got ghosts. All of us. And most of the time, we keep them in the attic with the old shirts and the photos we can't quite throw away. But sooner or later, if we want peace, we've got to open that door. Look them in the face and say, I see you. But you don't run me anymore. I ain't perfect. I didn't do everything right. But I'm still here. And I'm still trying. And that counts for something. So, if you're sitting there right now, feeling like it's too late, like the damage is done, like the words you didn't say weigh more than the ones you did, I want you to hear me. It's not too late to start telling the truth. To yourself. To someone else. To the child inside you who's still waiting to be heard. You don't have to fix it all. You just have to stop pretending it didn't happen. That's where freedom begins. And maybe, just maybe, it's time. Maybe it's time you stopped waiting for someone else to say it first. Maybe it's time to knock on the door next to yours. Or to ask the question you've been too afraid to answer. Maybe it's time to stop surviving in silence and start living in truth. So that's my story. Or, at least a part of it. The part one used to bury beneath casseroles and garden weeds and polite smiles in the church pews. Funny thing is, I never thought I'd tell it. Never thought anyone would want to listen, let alone sit through all 10 chapters of a life that cracked in half and slowly learned how to breathe again. But here you are. And here I am. 2 people, maybe 1,000 miles apart, but close enough now to feel something real between us. You know, sometimes I sit out on my little porch with a cup of tea and just watch the trees move in the wind. There's a quiet comfort in that, watching something bend, but not break. I think that's what we're all trying to do, in our own way. Bend, not break. Keep going. Keep listening. Keep loving, even when it hurts. And let me tell you something, from one heart to another, there's more love in the world than we think. Not always in the places we expect. Not always in the people we hoped. But it's there. In second chances. In mended seams. In the soft click of a phone line when someone finally picks up. It's in the questions we ask too late, and the ones we finally dare to ask now. I don't have all the answers. Lord knows I've spent a lifetime learning things the hard way. But I've come to believe this. Truth and tenderness go hand in hand. It's not enough to survive. We've got to feel. Even the ache. Especially the ache. Because that's where we find each other. And stories like mine, they're not just about the past. They're about right now. About every woman who's bit her tongue too long. About every daughter who waited to be believed. About every man who wants to be better than the ones before him. About anyone who's ever stared at the ceiling at 2 a.m. wondering if they did enough. If they're enough. Maybe you know someone like that. Maybe you are someone like that. So let me ask you, softly, not accusing, just wondering. Is there someone in your life waiting for you to see them? Not fix them. Not save them. Just see them? Maybe it's a child who won't meet your eyes. Maybe it's an old friend you haven't called in years. Maybe it's you. Sitting there listening, feeling that ache and realizing you've been silent too long. And maybe, just maybe, now's the time. You don't need to be brave all at once. Just honest. One small truth at a time. I'm no preacher. I'm no saint. Just an old woman with a weathered voice and a life that taught me more than I ever asked to learn. But if my story gave you even a sliver of something, courage, comfort, clarity, then it was worth telling. Every word. And if you've stayed this long, thank you. From the deepest corner of this worn-out heart, thank you. Now, before we part, let me leave you with this. Do you think love, the real kind, ever comes back after you've lost it? I don't mean romance, sugar. I mean the love that knows you, the love that forgives, the love that listens, even when you've been quiet too long. Because sometimes, when the sun hits the porch just right, and the wind smells like honeysuckle, I could almost swear I hear my daughter's voice behind me. And sometimes, just sometimes, I think she remembers too.